I never thought the words would come from my own son's mouth. Standing in my kitchen, the one I'd scrubbed clean for 32 years, Marcus looked me dead in the eye and said it with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near warmth. His wife, Jennifer, stood behind him, arms crossed, that same smug expression she'd worn since the day they announced their engagement. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains I'd sewn myself back when Marcus was still in elementary school, and for a moment, I couldn't process what I'd just heard. My son, my baby boy who I'd raised alone after his father walked out, had just told me that his wife had put me in my place. Those exact words. Put me in my place. Let me back up because this didn't start yesterday or last week. This started the moment Jennifer entered our lives 3 years ago. Marcus met her at some corporate networking event, and I'll admit, when he first brought her home for dinner, I tried. God knows I tried to like her. She was polished, articulate, had a successful career in marketing. On paper, she was everything a mother might hope for in a daughter-in-law. But there was something in the way she looked at my home, at my furniture, at the family photos on the walls, that made my skin crawl. It wasn't disgust exactly. It was more like assessment, like she was cataloging everything she planned to change. The first real incident happened during Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I'd spent 3 days preparing the meal, using my mother's recipes, the ones passed down through 4 generations. Jennifer arrived late with Marcus, walked into my kitchen without so much as a hello, opened my oven, and wrinkled her nose. Jennifer said, "Is this how you're making the turkey? Marcus told me you're traditional, but I brought a recipe from this chef I follow online. It's much more modern. Here, let me show you." I remember standing there with my oven mitts on, completely stunned. Marcus just shrugged and said his wife knew a lot about cooking because she'd taken some online courses. Online courses. I'd been cooking for 47 years, but apparently that didn't measure up to someone's internet tutorials. I didn't argue that day. I stepped aside, let her fuss with my turkey, and watched as she added ingredients that completely changed the flavor profile my family had loved for decades. When everyone ate dinner, my sister Patricia pulled me aside and asked what I'd done differently because it didn't taste the same. I didn't have the heart to tell her I hadn't done anything at all. Looking back now, I can see that Thanksgiving was just the beginning of a systematic campaign to undermine my role in Marcus's life. Jennifer had a way of making everything seem reasonable in the moment, framing her criticisms as helpful suggestions or modern improvements. But the cumulative effect was devastating. Each small incident chipped away at my confidence, at my relationship with my son, at the foundation we'd built together over 30 years. The Christmas after that Thanksgiving brought another confrontation. I'd always hosted Christmas Eve dinner at my house. It was tradition, something Marcus and I had done together since he was a baby. We'd decorate the tree together the first weekend of December, bake cookies while listening to carols, and on Christmas Eve, family would gather around my dining room table for a feast. But that year, Jennifer announced in early December that she and Marcus would be hosting Christmas at their apartment instead. Jennifer said, "It's time we started our own traditions, Diana. Marcus and I are building our own family now, and we need to establish ourselves as the hosts. You understand, right? You can still come, of course, but as a guest." The way she emphasized guest made it clear what she meant. I was being demoted in my own son's life, shifted from the matriarch who held the family together to just another attendee at someone else's celebration. Marcus stood next to her, nodding along, and when I looked at him with hurt in my eyes, he just said it would be nice to have Christmas at their place for a change. A change. As if 32 years of tradition was something that needed changing. I went to their Christmas Eve dinner, but it felt wrong from the moment I walked in. Jennifer had decorated everything in white and silver, a stark modern aesthetic that felt cold and impersonal. There were no family ornaments, no handmade decorations Marcus had crafted as a child, no warmth. The food was catered, elegant but flavorless, nothing like the comfort foods our family had always shared. And throughout the evening, Jennifer made little comments about how much easier it was to cater rather than slaving in the kitchen for days, how modern families didn't need to cling to outdated traditions, how refreshing it was to do things differently. My sister Patricia left early, claiming she had a headache. In the parking lot, she grabbed my arm and said, "What is happening to Marcus? That's not the boy you raised. And that woman, Diana, she's trying to erase you. You see that, right?" I saw it. God help me, I saw it clearly. But what could I do? He was an adult, married, making his own choices. I couldn't force him to see what was happening, couldn't make him understand that his wife was systematically cutting him off from everyone who'd loved him before she arrived. All I could do was watch and hope he'd wake up before it was too late. The incidents continued to accumulate. Jennifer would call me to cancel plans Marcus and I had made, claiming he was too busy or too tired. When I'd ask to speak to Marcus directly, she'd say he was in the shower or on an important work call. Then Marcus would call me days later, apologizing but never quite explaining why he hadn't called himself initially. Jennifer started monitoring his phone, I realized later. She'd check his messages and call logs, question him about who he was talking to and why. If he mentioned having lunch with an old friend, she'd find reasons why that friend was a bad influence, or why spending time away from her was hurtful to their marriage. I watched my son's social circle shrink. His college roommate, David, who'd been his best friend for 15 years, stopped coming around. When I asked Marcus about it, he said David and Jennifer didn't get along, and it was easier to just let that friendship fade than to deal with Jennifer's complaints every time he spent time with David. Easier. That word started appearing in Marcus's vocabulary with alarming frequency. It was easier to skip family dinners than argue with Jennifer about attending. It was easier to decline my invitations than explain to his wife why he wanted to spend time with me. It was easier to let her make decisions than voice his own preferences. I tried talking to him about it once, about 6 months before the house situation exploded. We were having coffee, just the two of us, a rare occurrence by that point. I chose my words carefully, not wanting to attack Jennifer directly, but needing to express my concerns. I said, "Marcus, honey, I've noticed you seem stressed lately. Is everything okay? With work? With the marriage? With life in general?" He stirred his coffee for a long moment before answering. Marcus said, "It's fine, Mom. Marriage is an adjustment, that's all." Jennifer has strong opinions about things, and sometimes it's easier to just go along than to turn everything into a debate. But that's normal, right? Compromise is part of marriage. I said, "Compromise is when both people give a little to meet in the middle. What you're describing sounds more like surrender." "There's a difference, sweetheart." His face closed off immediately, and I knew I'd pushed too hard. Marcus said, "You don't understand our relationship. Jennifer isn't controlling. She just knows what she wants, and she's not afraid to ask for it. That's one of the things I love about her. She's confident and decisive." I wanted to tell him that there's a difference between confidence and dominance, between being decisive and being dictatorial. But I could see he wasn't ready to hear it, so I backed off. That conversation haunted me for months afterward. I kept replaying it in my mind, wondering if I should have pushed harder, said more, made him see what was so obvious to everyone else. But the truth is, you can't force someone to recognize manipulation when they're deep in the middle of it. They have to come to that realization themselves, and sometimes that realization comes at a terrible cost. After that, the incidents multiplied. Jennifer would comment on my clothing choices when we went out together, suggesting stores where I could find more age-appropriate styles. She'd correct my grammar in front of other people, laughing like it was an endearing joke. When I mentioned wanting to take a watercolor painting class at the community center, she said painting was nice for a hobby but didn't I think I was a bit old to be starting something new. Marcus never defended me. Not once. He'd laugh along with her or change the subject, and each time it happened, I felt a little piece of our relationship crumble away. The real catalyst came 6 months ago when Marcus and Jennifer started talking about buying a house. They'd been renting an apartment downtown, a sleek modern place that suited Jennifer's aesthetic perfectly. But Jennifer wanted something bigger, something in the suburbs with a yard and good schools for the children they were planning. I was happy for them, genuinely excited that they were taking this step. I even offered to help with the down payment if they needed it. I had some savings tucked away, money I'd carefully accumulated over years of working double shifts as a nurse, then later as a nursing supervisor. Jennifer said, "That's sweet, Diana, but we're fine financially. What we really need is someone to help with childcare once we have kids. You're retired now, right? It would be perfect. You could move in with us, help raise the grandchildren, and we wouldn't have to pay for expensive daycare." The way she said it wasn't a request or even a suggestion. It was an assumption, an expectation. I looked at Marcus, waiting for him to say something, to acknowledge that maybe this was a conversation we should have privately, as mother and son. But he just nodded enthusiastically. Marcus said, "It makes perfect sense, Mom. You're alone in that big house anyway. This way, you'd be with family and you'd get to spend all your time with your grandkids." Jennifer's thought it all through. That big house he mentioned so casually, that was my home. The home I'd bought with my own money 28 years ago after his father left us with nothing but debt and broken promises. I was 34 years old, working night shifts at the hospital, taking extra hours wherever I could find them, saving every penny that didn't go to keeping Marcus fed, clothed, and in good schools. It took me 4 years to save enough for the down payment. 4 years of rice and beans for dinner, of wearing the same 3 outfits to work, of telling Marcus we couldn't afford the field trips or the fancy sneakers all his friends had. When I finally signed those papers and got the keys, I cried in my car for an hour. That house represented everything I'd fought for, every sacrifice I'd made, every moment I'd refused to give up even when giving up seemed so much easier than pushing forward. But Jennifer's plan didn't stop at me moving in with them. Over the next few weeks, she began dropping hints about how valuable my property was, about how I didn't really need all that space, about how the neighborhood was changing and maybe it was time to cash out while the market was strong. Each conversation felt like she was testing the waters, seeing how I'd react, how much resistance I'd offer. And each time, Marcus would be there, echoing her sentiments, adding his own pressure to the equation. One afternoon, they invited me to lunch at a trendy restaurant Jennifer loved. Halfway through the meal, Jennifer pulled out her phone and started showing me listings for senior living communities. Not nursing homes, she was careful to clarify, but active adult communities with amenities and activities, places where I could downsize, simplify my life, be around people my own age. Jennifer said, "Look at this one, Diana. It has a pool, a fitness center, organized social events. You'd make so many new friends. And the best part is, these condos are a fraction of the cost of your house. You could sell your place, buy one of these, and have plenty left over. Doesn't that sound appealing?" What she didn't say, but what hung in the air unspoken, was where that leftover money would go. I looked at the pictures on her phone, at the smiling seniors playing cards and doing water aerobics, and felt a wave of sadness wash over me. There was nothing wrong with those communities. For some people, they were probably wonderful. But that wasn't me. I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture, to trade my home and independence for organized activities and neighbors who were chosen for me based on age rather than shared interests or values. I said, "That's a kind thought, Jennifer, but I'm very happy where I am. I have my garden, my neighbors who I've known for decades, my routines. I'm not looking to make a change right now." Her smile tightened, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Anger, maybe, or frustration that I wasn't falling into line with her plans. She exchanged a look with Marcus, one of those wordless communications that couples develop, and I knew this conversation was far from over. Marcus said, "Mom, just think about it, okay? You don't have to decide anything today. Just consider the possibilities. Jennifer's just trying to help you see opportunities you might not have thought about." The pressure increased from there. They started sending me real estate listings by email, articles about the benefits of downsizing, information about estate planning and how keeping too much property could complicate things for heirs. The subtext was always the same. "Your house is too much for you. You should sell it. We need the money more than you need the space." And slowly, insidiously, they tried to make me feel guilty for not complying, for not being the selfless mother who sacrificed everything, including her home, for her child's benefit. My sister Patricia came over one evening after I'd received a particularly lengthy email from Jennifer outlining all the reasons why selling would be the smart, responsible, mature choice. I showed Patricia the email, and she read it with her mouth falling open in disbelief. Patricia said, "Diana, this is outrageous. She's not even being subtle anymore. She's essentially demanding you give them your house money. And Marcus is going along with this?" I nodded, feeling tears prick at my eyes. I said, "He doesn't see it as demanding. He thinks Jennifer is being helpful, looking out for everyone's best interests. But Patricia, I've worked too hard for this house. I can't just give it up because my daughter-in-law has decided she wants a bigger place than they can afford on their own." Patricia grabbed my hands across the table. She said, "Then don't. Diana, you raised Marcus to stand on his own 2 feet. You put him through college debt-free. You've helped him in countless ways over the years. You don't owe him your house. You don't owe him your security or your independence. If he can't see that, if he's so wrapped up in Jennifer's manipulation that he's willing to pressure you like this, then he needs a wake-up call. A serious one." I knew she was right, but knowing didn't make it easier. This was my son, my only child, the person I loved most in the world. The thought of being at odds with him, of having to choose between my own well-being and his approval, was agonizing. But I also knew that if I gave in, if I sold my house and handed them the money, I'd be setting a precedent I could never undo. I'd be teaching Marcus that manipulation worked, that if he and Jennifer pushed hard enough, I'd eventually cave. And more than that, I'd be betraying everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built, everything I'd overcome to get to this point in my life. I didn't move in with them. I politely declined, explaining that I loved my home and my independence, that I'd be happy to babysit regularly, but that I needed my own space. Jennifer's face tightened into a smile that looked more like a threat, but she didn't push it further that day. Marcus looked disappointed but said he understood. I thought maybe we'd weathered the storm. I was wrong. Over the next few months, the pressure intensified. Every family gathering became an opportunity for Jennifer to bring up how much easier their lives would be if I'd just be reasonable. She'd talk about the sacrifices parents make for their children, about how families should support each other, about how selfish it was to cling to material possessions when you could be helping your own flesh and blood. And Marcus, my son who I'd raised to think for himself, to stand up for what was right, just nodded along like a puppet. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Marcus and Jennifer invited me to dinner at their apartment. I should have known something was up because Jennifer actually cooked instead of ordering takeout like she usually did. They waited until after we'd eaten, until I was relaxed and off guard, before Jennifer launched into her prepared speech. Jennifer said, Diana, we need to talk about your living situation. Marcus and I have been discussing this extensively, and we think it's time for you to seriously consider selling your house. The market is good right now, and that property is worth a lot of money. You could sell it, move into a nice senior apartment, something manageable where you wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or yard work. Then you could give us the proceeds to help with our house purchase. We found this beautiful property in Riverside Estates, but it's just slightly out of our budget. With your help, we could make it work. And don't worry, we'd set aside a room for you to stay whenever you wanted to visit. I sat there, my coffee cup halfway to my lips, trying to process what I was hearing. She wanted me to sell my home, give them the money, and be grateful for the privilege of visiting them in their new house whenever they deemed it convenient. I said, Jennifer, that house isn't just property to me, it's my home. I worked incredibly hard to buy it, and I'm not interested in selling it or moving into a senior apartment. I'm only 62 years old, I'm in perfect health, and I manage just fine. Marcus said, Mom, you're being stubborn. Jennifer's right. That house is too big for one person, and you could really help us out here. Isn't that what parents do? Help their kids get started in life? I said, Marcus, I helped you get started in life. I put you through college. I bought your first car. I helped furnish your first apartment. But I'm not going to sell my home so you can buy a bigger one when you can already afford a perfectly nice house in your budget. Jennifer's face went red, and her voice took on an edge I'd never heard before. She said, This is exactly what Marcus warned me about. You act like you're this generous, loving mother, but when it really counts, when your son actually needs you, you're too selfish to help. You'd rather sit alone in that outdated house than see your own child happy. Do you know how that makes him feel? Do you even care? I turned to Marcus, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife that she'd crossed a line. Instead, he looked down at his plate and said nothing. The silence stretched out until I couldn't bear it anymore. I stood up, thanked them for dinner, and left. I cried the entire drive home, not because of Jennifer's words, but because my son had sat there and let her say them. They didn't call for a week. Then Marcus showed up at my door alone. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe he'd come to apologize, to tell me he'd been thinking about everything and realized how unfair they'd been. But no, he came to deliver an ultimatum. Marcus said, Mom, I need you to really think about what you're doing. Jennifer is my wife. She's my future, my partner in everything. When you refuse to help us, you're not just disappointing me, you're damaging my marriage. Jennifer feels disrespected by you. She feels like you don't value her or our relationship. I'm caught in the middle here, and it's not fair. You need to decide what's more important, keeping a house or keeping your son. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I said, Marcus, I'm not choosing a house over you. I'm choosing to keep what I worked for, what I earned. That's not the same thing. If Jennifer feels disrespected because I won't sell my home and give you the money, then maybe her expectations are the problem, not my boundaries. He left angry, and I didn't hear from him for 2 more weeks. When he finally called, it was to invite me to lunch. I agreed, desperate for any chance to fix what was breaking between us. We met at a cafe near his office, and I tried to keep things light, asking about his work, his friends, anything to find neutral ground. But halfway through the meal, he brought it up again. Marcus said, Jennifer found a realtor who specializes in properties like yours. She'd be happy to come give you a free market analysis, no obligation, just so you can see what the house is worth. You might be surprised at the number. I put down my fork and looked at my son, really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had he learned to manipulate instead of communicate honestly? I said, Marcus, no. I don't want a market analysis. I don't want to know what the house is worth because I'm not selling it. Please hear me when I say this. I love you more than anything in this world, but I will not give up my home, my security, my independence because your wife thinks I should. That's final." His jaw tightened, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Contempt. He said, "You're making a mistake, Mom. A really big mistake. Don't say I didn't warn you." That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, the relationship had deteriorated even further. Jennifer started a campaign on social media, posting vague messages about ungrateful parents and family members who refused to support each other. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone who knew our family understood exactly who she meant. My phone started buzzing with messages from relatives, some supportive, others questioning whether I was being too rigid. My sister Patricia called me in tears, saying she'd heard I was refusing to help Marcus buy a house, and couldn't I compromise somehow? Then came today. Marcus showed up at my house unannounced with Jennifer in tow. I was in my garden, pulling weeds from the flower beds I'd planted 15 years ago, when I heard their car pull into the driveway. My stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came from Jennifer showing up at my door. I pulled off my gardening gloves and met them in the front yard. Marcus said, "We need to come inside and talk." I let them in, feeling like I was allowing something dangerous into my sanctuary. We sat in the living room, and Jennifer wasted no time. Jennifer said, "Diana, this has gone on long enough. Your stubbornness is affecting Marcus's mental health. He's stressed constantly because of this situation. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to list the house within the next month. We've already spoken to a realtor, and she's ready whenever you are. You're going to sell it, and you're going to give us 70% of the proceeds to help with our down payment. The remaining 30% will be enough for you to put down a deposit on a nice senior living apartment. We've already researched facilities, and there are several good options within 20 minutes of where we'll be living." I stared at her, genuinely speechless. The audacity, the sheer entitlement of this woman sitting in my living room, in the home I'd sacrificed everything to buy, telling me what I was going to do with my own property. Something inside me snapped. Not into anger exactly, but into absolute clarity. I said, "Jennifer, I don't know what universe you're living in where you think you have any right to make demands about my house. But let me be crystal clear. I'm not selling, I'm not moving, and I'm certainly not giving you 70% of anything. This conversation is over." She stood up, her face flushed with anger. Jennifer said, "Marcus, are you going to let her talk to me like this? Are you going to let your mother disrespect me in front of you?" And that's when Marcus said it. That's when my son, my only child, the boy I'd given up everything for, looked at me with cold eyes and said, "Jennifer's right, Mom. You're being disrespectful and selfish. My wife just put you in your place, and honestly, it's about time someone did." The room went silent. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, could hear the neighbor's dog barking outside, could hear my own heart breaking. I stood up slowly, walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room, and opened the drawer. Inside was a folder I'd kept there for years, a folder containing all the important documents related to the house. I pulled out the deed, the original deed from 28 years ago, and walked back to where they stood. I said, "Marcus, come here. I want to show you something." He looked confused but approached me. I unfolded the deed and held it up where both he and Jennifer could see it clearly. I said, "See this name right here? Diana Marie Richardson. That's me. This house is in my name. Only my name. Your father's name never appeared on this deed because I bought this house myself after he left us with nothing. Do you remember those years, Marcus? Do you remember eating cereal for dinner sometimes because that's all we could afford? Do you remember me telling you we couldn't go on vacation because I was saving money? Do you remember the times you asked for things and I had to say no, over and over again? Not because I didn't love you, but because I was trying to build something stable for us?" Marcus's face had gone pale, but I wasn't finished. I turned to Jennifer. I said, "And you, Jennifer. You've been in this family for 3 years. 3 years. I've lived in this house for 28 years. I bought it when your husband was 6 years old. I've painted every wall, planted every flower in that garden, fixed every leak, replaced every broken appliance. This house isn't just a piece of property to me. It's proof that I survived. It's proof that I could take care of my son on my own, that I could build a life from nothing. And you think you can walk in here and demand I give it up so you can have a bigger house in a fancier neighborhood? You think that's reasonable?" Jennifer said, "We're his family now. Your role is to support him, not hold him back." I actually laughed, a bitter sound that surprised even me. I said, "My role? Let me tell you about my role. My role was to get up at 5 in the morning to make sure Marcus had a hot breakfast before school. My role was to work double shifts at the hospital so I could afford his baseball equipment, his school supplies, his class trips. My role was to help him with his homework until midnight, then get 4 hours of sleep before doing it all over again. My role was to put him through college without a single student loan because I'd been saving since he was born. My role was to love him unconditionally, to teach him right from wrong, to raise him to be a good man. And I did all of that. I fulfilled my role. But nowhere in the parent handbook does it say I have to bankrupt myself so my adult son can impress his wife with a luxury house purchase. Marcus said, "Mom, this isn't about impressing anyone. We need the space. We're starting a family." I said, "No, Marcus. You want the space. There's a difference. You want it because Jennifer wants it, and you've convinced yourself that what she wants is what you need. But let me ask you something. When was the last time you made a decision without checking with her first? When was the last time you stood up for yourself, for your own thoughts and feelings? When was the last time you stood up for me?" He didn't answer. The silence was damning. I continued, "I've watched you change over these last 3 years. You used to call me twice a week just to chat. Now I'm lucky if I hear from you once a month. You used to stop by on Sundays for dinner. Now you only come when you want something. You used to tell me about your life, your hopes, your struggles. Now you only talk to me through Jennifer's filter. She's not your partner, Marcus. She's your puppeteer, and you're so tangled in the strings you can't even see it anymore." Jennifer said, "This is ridiculous. Marcus, we don't have to stand here and listen to this. Your mother has made her position clear. She cares more about herself than about your happiness. Fine, we know where we stand now." She turned to leave, but Marcus stood frozen, looking at the deed in my hands. Something in his expression had shifted, like he was seeing something he'd been avoiding for a long time. I said, "Marcus, before you go, I need you to understand something. I love you. I will always love you. But I will not set myself on fire to keep you warm. I will not sacrifice my security, my home, my peace of mind because your wife has convinced you that I owe you something more than what I've already given. I raised you to be independent, to stand on your own 2 feet, to work hard for what you want. That was the greatest gift I could give you. If you've forgotten that lesson, if you've decided that manipulating your mother into funding your lifestyle is acceptable, then I failed somewhere along the way, and I'm sorry for that. But I won't compound that failure by enabling this behavior." Jennifer grabbed Marcus's arm and said, "Let's go. She's not going to change her mind. She's too selfish." But Marcus pulled his arm away from her. He was still staring at the deed, at the date on it, at the proof of everything I'd said. He said, "Mom, how old was I when you bought this house?" I said, "You were 6, first grade. You came with me to the closing. You don't remember, but you drew pictures in the lawyer's office while I signed all the papers. Afterwards, we got ice cream to celebrate, even though it was October and cold outside. You got chocolate chip. I got vanilla." His eyes were watering now, and for the first time in months, I saw my son, my real son, behind the mask he'd been wearing. He said, "I remember that day. I remember being so happy because you kept saying we had our own house now, that nobody could make us leave. You said we'd always have a home." I nodded, my own tears starting to fall. I said, "And I meant it, baby. This is our home. It's where I raised you, where we built our life together. But it's my home too, Marcus. It's my accomplishment, my safety net, my retirement security. You asking me to give it up isn't love. It's not family. It's cruelty." Jennifer said, "Marcus, we're leaving. Now." But Marcus wasn't moving. He was looking around the living room, seeing it maybe for the first time in years. The photos on the walls, all documenting his childhood. The bookshelf filled with the books I'd read to him every night. The couch we'd picked out together when he was in high school. The one he'd saved his part-time job money to help me buy. The curtains I'd sewn myself, the same ones I'd mentioned earlier. This wasn't just a house. It was a museum of our life together, of every sacrifice and every triumph. He turned to Jennifer and said something I never expected to hear. He said, "Give me a minute. I need to talk to my mom alone." Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions, shock, anger, disbelief, before settling into icy fury. She said, "Fine, I'll be in the car. But Marcus, if you back down now, if you let her manipulate you with these guilt trips, don't expect me to forget it." She stormed out, slamming the front door behind her. Marcus and I stood there in the aftermath, neither of us quite knowing what to say. Finally, he sank down onto the couch and put his head in his hands. Marcus said, "What have I been doing? Mom, what have I been doing?" I sat down next to him, keeping some space between us because I wasn't sure how much closeness he'd accept right now. I said, "You fell in love. You wanted to make your wife happy. There's nothing wrong with that." But somewhere along the way, making her happy became more important than treating the people who love you with respect. He looked up at me, and his face was streaked with tears. He said, "She's been in my ear constantly about the house. Every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, telling me how unfair you're being, how you don't really love me, how you're standing in the way of our future." And I believed her. God, Mom, I believed her. I let her convince me that you were the problem when all you were doing was protecting yourself. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I reached over and took his hand. I said, "Marcus, I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen. Jennifer's behavior, these demands, this manipulation, it's not normal. It's not how loving partners treat each other, or how they encourage their spouses to treat their parents. Healthy relationships don't require you to choose between your wife and your mother. They don't require you to sacrifice your integrity or your family bonds to prove your love." He nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. He said, "I know. I think I've known for a while, but I kept telling myself I was being disloyal if I questioned her. She's very good at making me feel guilty when I don't agree with her immediately. It's exhausting." I squeezed his hand. I said, "That's called emotional manipulation, sweetheart. And it's not love. Love doesn't exhaust you. It shouldn't make you feel guilty for having boundaries or for maintaining relationships with people who were in your life long before your partner arrived." We sat in silence for a while, both processing everything that had been said. Finally, Marcus spoke again. Marcus said, "What do I do now? I'm married to her. I made vows, but I can't keep going like this. Every day feels like I'm losing more of myself, and today, I almost lost you. I actually stood here and told you that she put you in your place. Mom, you bought this house through sheer force of will and sacrifice. You raised me alone. You gave me everything. And I told you my wife put you in your place. I'm ashamed of myself." I said, "You should be. But shame can be productive if you use it to change your behavior. Marcus, I can't tell you what to do about your marriage. That's something you need to figure out for yourself. But I can tell you this. If you stay with Jennifer, you need to establish boundaries. Real boundaries that you enforce consistently. You need to make it clear that I am your mother, that I have earned your respect, and that she doesn't get to talk to me or about me the way she has been. You need to be prepared for the possibility that she won't accept those boundaries, and then you'll have a decision to make." He nodded, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Fear of confrontation, fear of loss, fear of admitting he might have made a terrible mistake. Those are heavy fears to carry. Marcus said, "What if I've ruined everything between us? What if you can't forgive me?" I pulled him into a hug then, the way I used to when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. I said, "Marcus, you're my son. I brought you into this world and I loved you before I even met you. That doesn't disappear because we went through a rough patch. But I won't lie to you. Trust has been damaged. Our relationship has been hurt. Healing from that is going to take time and effort from both of us. You're going to have to show me through your actions that you mean the apologies you're making right now. And I'm going to have to work on letting go of the hurt and disappointment I've been carrying around." He hugged me tighter and said, "I'll do whatever it takes. I promise. I'll make this right." We heard a car horn outside. Jennifer, obviously impatient and probably furious that Marcus had been talking to me alone for so long. He pulled back and looked toward the door, then back at me. Marcus said, "I have to go. She's waiting, and if I don't go now, there's going to be a huge fight. But Mom, can I come back tomorrow? Just me, without Jennifer. Can we talk more?" I said, "Of course. This is your home too, Marcus. It always has been. You're always welcome here." He stood up, hesitated, then turned back one more time. Marcus said, "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I forgot that for a while." I said, "I love you too, baby. More than you know." After he left, I sat alone in my living room for a long time, holding that deed in my hands. The paper was yellowed now, the edges soft from age, but the words were still clear. Diana Marie Richardson, owner. Proof of everything I'd overcome, everything I'd built, everything I'd refused to surrender even when it would have been easier to give up. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was my declaration of independence, my testament to survival, my promise to myself that I would never again be at someone else's mercy. The next day, Marcus came back as promised. He arrived at 10 in the morning, carrying a box of the pastries I loved from the bakery across town, the one he used to work at during high school. We sat at the kitchen table and he talked, really talked, in a way he hadn't in years. He told me about the problems in his marriage, about how Jennifer's demands had been escalating over time, about how isolated he'd become from his friends and other family members because she always found reasons why he shouldn't see them. He told me he'd been thinking about couples counseling, but Jennifer refused, saying their problems weren't serious enough to need outside help, and that suggesting therapy was insulting to her. Marcus said, "Last night was bad. She was furious with me for not leaving immediately when she wanted to. She accused me of choosing you over her, of being a mama's boy, of letting you manipulate me. We fought for hours. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, after she'd finally gone to bed still angry, I sat in the dark in our living room and asked myself if this was really the life I wanted. Fighting constantly, walking on eggshells, being told who I can talk to and when, feeling guilty for maintaining a relationship with my own mother. And Mom, the answer was no. This isn't the life I want." I listened without interrupting, letting him process his thoughts out loud. When he finished, I asked him what he planned to do. Marcus said, "I'm going to insist on counseling. If she refuses, I'm going to suggest a separation so we can both figure out what we really want. And I'm going to start rebuilding the relationships I've neglected, starting with you. I know I can't fix 3 years of damage overnight, but I want to try." I reached across the table and took his hand. I said, "That takes courage, Marcus. Real courage. I'm proud of you for being willing to face this honestly." Over the next few weeks, I watched my son fight for his life back. He suggested counseling to Jennifer, and as he'd predicted, she refused. She told him he was being dramatic, that all couples fought, that he was letting his mother poison his mind against her. When he insisted, she gave him an ultimatum: drop the counseling idea and cut off contact with me, or she'd leave him. She said she couldn't be married to someone who didn't put her first, who didn't value her input, who chose his mother's outdated values over their modern marriage. Marcus called me the night she gave him that ultimatum. His voice was shaky, but there was steel underneath it. He said, "She wants me to choose, so I'm choosing. I'm choosing to respect myself, to maintain the relationships that matter to me, and to refuse to be controlled by someone who claims to love me but treats me like a possession." I told her I won't cut you out of my life, and if that's a deal breaker for her, then we need to separate. Jennifer moved out the next day. She took her clothes, her personal belongings, and the expensive furniture she'd insisted they buy. She left the apartment nearly empty, which Marcus said felt appropriate somehow. She'd emptied his life of so much. Why not empty the physical space too? He moved back home with me temporarily, into his old bedroom with the posters we'd never taken down and the trophies from his baseball days still on the shelves. It was strange having him there again, my grown son sleeping in his childhood room, but it was also healing in ways I hadn't expected. Those first few weeks were difficult for Marcus. He'd wake up in the middle of the night and I'd hear him pacing in his room, processing everything that had happened. Some mornings I'd find him sitting at the kitchen table at dawn, staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was grieving, not just for the marriage that had ended, but for the version of himself he'd lost along the way. The man who'd stopped calling his friends, who'd stopped pursuing his hobbies, who'd stopped making decisions without checking with someone else first. He was grieving for the years he'd spent walking on eggshells, for the relationships he'd damaged or neglected, for the time he could never get back. We fell into a routine. I'd make breakfast before he left for work. He'd come home and tell me about his day. We'd cook dinner together, trying new recipes and laughing when they didn't turn out right. On weekends, we'd work in the garden together, and he'd tell me about his plans for the future, about the apartment he was looking at, about the therapy sessions he'd started attending on his own. He talked about how much he was learning about himself, about the patterns he'd fallen into, about the warning signs he'd ignored because he'd been so desperate to make his marriage work. The therapy was particularly transformative for Marcus. His counselor, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, specialized in helping people recover from controlling relationships. In his sessions, Marcus began to understand the psychological mechanisms Jennifer had used to isolate and manipulate him. Dr. Chen explained concepts like gaslighting, love bombing, and intermittent reinforcement, terms Marcus had never heard before, but that described his marriage with painful accuracy. One evening, Marcus came home from a session looking both exhausted and enlightened. He sat down at the kitchen table where I was chopping vegetables for dinner and said he needed to tell me something important. Marcus said, "Dr. Chen had me make a list today, a list of all the friendships I had before Jennifer and what happened to each one. Mom, I wrote down 17 names, 17 people who used to be part of my life, and now I don't talk to any of them. Not because they did anything wrong, but because Jennifer found fault with every single one. David was too immature. Rachel was too opinionated. My cousin Stephen drank too much. My old coworker Tom was a bad influence. And I believed her every time. I let her convince me that all these people who cared about me were somehow problematic, and I cut them out one by one. By the time she started on you, there was nobody left to tell me this wasn't normal. I stopped chopping and sat down across from him. I said, "That's how manipulation works, sweetheart. It's gradual. Each cut is small enough that you don't realize you're bleeding out until you're nearly empty. But Marcus, you realized it. You saw what was happening and you chose to get out. That takes enormous courage." He wiped at his eyes and continued. Marcus said, "Dr. Chen also had me examine the timeline of Jennifer's behavior. How she was so charming and wonderful at first. How she made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. Then slowly the criticism started. Small things at first, framed as helpful suggestions. My clothes could be better. My hair looked nicer a different way. I should spend less time at the gym because she missed me. It felt like love, like she just wanted me to be my best self and wanted to spend time with me. But it wasn't love. It was control. She was testing to see how much I'd change for her, how much of myself I'd give up. Over the following months, Marcus worked diligently in therapy to rebuild his sense of self. He reached out to old friends, apologizing for his absence and explaining what he'd been going through. To his surprise and relief, most of them were understanding and welcoming. David, his college best friend, met him for coffee and told him he'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known how to intervene without pushing Marcus further away. They started meeting regularly again, and I watched Marcus rediscover the easy laughter and genuine connection he'd been missing. Marcus also started reconnecting with extended family members. He called his cousin Stephen and apologized for missing his wedding. He visited his Aunt Margaret, who lived 2 hours away, and spent the afternoon helping her with yard work, something he used to do regularly before Jennifer had deemed it a waste of time. He attended his goddaughter's birthday party, meeting relatives he hadn't seen in over a year, all of whom were thrilled to have him back in their lives. Through all of this, Marcus and I grew closer than we'd been in years. He started asking me about my life, really asking, not just making polite conversation. He wanted to know about my watercolor classes, about the book club I'd joined, about the volunteer work I did at the community center. He'd come with me sometimes, helping set up for events or just keeping me company. We'd talk about everything, from mundane daily occurrences to deep philosophical questions about life and relationships and what it means to truly love someone. One Saturday afternoon, we were planting new roses in the front garden when Marcus put down his spade and looked at me seriously. Marcus said, "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When did you know? When did you first realize that Jennifer was bad for me?" I thought carefully before answering. I said, "I had concerns from early on, but I tried to dismiss them as normal mother-in-law wariness. But if I'm being completely honest, I knew for certain at that Christmas when she took over hosting. It wasn't about the location or the food. It was the way she looked at me when I arrived, like she'd won something. And the way you looked at me, like you were seeing me through her eyes instead of your own. That's when I knew she wasn't just influencing you. She was replacing your judgment with hers." He nodded slowly, absorbing this. Marcus said, "Why didn't you say something? Really say something, not just gentle hints?" I said, "Because you weren't ready to hear it. If I'd come at you with accusations about Jennifer, you would have defended her and pulled further away from me. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone you love is give them space to figure things out themselves, even when watching them struggle is painful beyond words. I had to trust that I'd raised you well enough that eventually you'd recognize the truth on your own." Marcus said, "That must have been so hard for you. Watching me change, watching our relationship deteriorate, knowing why but not being able to fix it." I said, "It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Harder than raising you alone. Harder than working those double shifts. Harder than any physical challenge I've ever faced. But Marcus, you did figure it out. Maybe not as quickly as I would have liked, but you got there. And now you have the tools to recognize these patterns if they ever appear again in future relationships. That's valuable knowledge, even if it came at a painful cost." One evening, about 2 months after Jennifer had moved out, we were sitting on the back porch watching the sunset. Marcus had just finished telling me about a breakthrough he'd had in therapy that day. Marcus said, "You know what my therapist said? She said that Jennifer's behavior showed classic signs of financial abuse. That's what it's called when someone tries to control another person through their finances or tries to isolate them from their support systems by creating financial dependence. She said Jennifer's plan to have you sell your house and give us the money would have put you in a vulnerable position where you'd have been dependent on us for housing, which would have given Jennifer even more control. Over all of us. I hadn't thought about it in those terms, but hearing it laid out like that made me cold. I said, "You dodged a bullet, sweetheart." We both did. He nodded and said, "I keep thinking about that moment when you showed me the deed. The look on your face, Mom. You weren't angry exactly. You were disappointed. And somehow that was so much worse than anger would have been. It was like you were looking at me and seeing a stranger, someone you'd never raised me to become. That moment broke something open in me. It made me see what I'd been doing, not just to you, but to myself." I said, "Sometimes we need those breaking open moments. They hurt, but they also let the light in." Marcus said, "Do you think you can really forgive me? For all of it?" I turned to look at him. This man who'd once been my little boy, who'd weathered this storm and come out the other side more himself than he'd been in years. I said, "I already have forgiven you, Marcus. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't hurt. It means choosing to move forward without letting the past hold us hostage. You've shown me through your actions that you meant your apology. You've put in the work to change. That's all I ever needed." He leaned over and hugged me, and I felt some final piece of the hurt I'd been carrying dissolve. We stayed there on the porch until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, rebuilding the bridge between us one conversation at a time. Marcus's divorce from Jennifer was finalized 4 months later. She'd tried to get spousal support, claiming she'd given up career opportunities to focus on their marriage, but the judge didn't buy it given that she'd maintained her high-paying marketing job throughout their relationship. She'd also tried to claim that Marcus had promised her money from my house sale, but without any legal documentation or proof, that went nowhere too. In the end, they split their limited joint assets and went their separate ways. Marcus told me Jennifer had already moved in with a new boyfriend, someone she'd apparently been talking to online for months before the separation. He said it stung a little, but mostly he just felt relieved that she was someone else's problem now. Marcus found his own apartment 6 months after moving back in with me. It was a nice place, not fancy, but comfortable, with big windows and a small balcony where he could grow herbs. He decorated it himself, and I helped him pick out furniture that was affordable but quality. On moving day, as we carried boxes up to his second-floor apartment, he stopped on the landing and looked at me. Marcus said, "Thank you, Mom, for everything, for keeping your house, for standing your ground, for showing me what real strength looks like. I needed to see that. I needed to remember where I came from and what you taught me about dignity and self-respect." I set down the box I was carrying and smiled at him. I said, "You would have figured it out eventually. I just helped speed the process along." He laughed and said, "Yeah, but if you'd sold the house, if you'd given in, I might have spent years convincing myself that the situation was normal. You saved me from that. You saved both of us." That evening, after we'd finished unpacking the essentials and ordered pizza to celebrate, we sat on his new balcony and looked out at the city lights. Marcus talked about his plans, about maybe going back to school to get his master's degree, about a woman he'd met at a work conference who seemed nice and normal and wasn't demanding he cut off contact with his family. He talked about wanting to do it right this time, to take things slow, to watch for warning signs, to never again let someone convince him that love meant surrender. I listened and offered advice when he asked for it, but mostly just enjoyed being with my son again, really being with him without the shadow of resentment and hurt hanging over us. This version of Marcus, the one sitting across from me making plans for a future built on healthy foundations, was the son I'd always known he could be. Sometimes people need to lose their way to truly appreciate the path home. A year later, I'm sitting in my living room, the same living room where everything fell apart and started to come back together. The house is still mine, the deed still bearing my name, and my name only. Marcus stops by twice a week for dinner, and we talk about everything under the sun. He's dating that woman from the conference, Rebecca, and she's lovely. She came to dinner last week and asked to see photos of Marcus as a child, then spent an hour listening to me tell embarrassing stories about his kindergarten days. She laughed in all the right places and didn't once suggest I redecorate or update my style or question my choices. Marcus looked at her like she hung the moon, and when she offered to help me with the dishes, he mouthed "thank you" to me when she wasn't looking. Rebecca is different from Jennifer in every way that matters. She's confident but not controlling, opinionated but respectful of others' viewpoints, ambitious but not at the expense of Marcus's own goals and dreams. She works as a middle school teacher, and when she talks about her students, her face lights up with genuine care and passion. She's close with her own family and actively encourages Marcus to maintain his relationships with me and our extended family. When Marcus mentioned wanting to help me repaint the living room, Rebecca offered to come help, then spent a Saturday afternoon in old clothes and a ponytail, rolling paint on walls and sharing teaching stories that had us both laughing. The contrast between the two relationships is stark. With Jennifer, Marcus had become smaller, quieter, more anxious. With Rebecca, he's becoming himself again, the warm, funny, thoughtful man I raised. They challenge each other in healthy ways, disagreeing sometimes but always with respect, and a genuine desire to understand the other person's perspective. When Rebecca doesn't like something Marcus has suggested, she says so directly but kindly, and they discuss it until they find a solution that works for both of them. There's no manipulation, no guilt trips, no keeping score of who sacrificed what. Last month, Marcus brought Rebecca to my house for a serious conversation. They sat on the couch together, holding hands, both looking nervous but excited. Marcus cleared his throat and said they had something to tell me. Marcus said, "Mom, Rebecca and I have been talking about the future. We're not rushing into anything. We're taking things slow and doing this right. But we wanted you to know that we're serious about each other. We're thinking long-term here." Rebecca squeezed his hand and added, "I also wanted to tell you, Diana, that Marcus has told me everything about what happened with Jennifer. Everything. And I want you to know that I understand how protective you might feel, how cautious you might be about anyone Marcus brings into his life. I want to earn your trust, not demand it. I want to build a relationship with you that's genuine and respectful, because you're important to Marcus, which makes you important to me." I felt tears prick my eyes, the good kind this time. I said, "Rebecca, the fact that you're saying these things tells me everything I need to know about your character. You don't need to earn my trust, honey. You already have it. I've watched you with Marcus over these past months, and I've seen nothing but kindness, respect, and genuine love. That's all I've ever wanted for my son." We talked for hours that evening about their plans, their dreams, their hopes for the future. They weren't looking to buy a mansion they couldn't afford. They were looking for a modest house in a good neighborhood with a yard big enough for the dog Rebecca wanted to adopt. They were saving money together, contributing equally, making decisions as true partners. When I offered to help with their down payment, genuinely this time without any pressure or expectation, Marcus thanked me but said they wanted to do this themselves. He said it was important to him to build his life with Rebecca on a foundation of their own work and their own achievements. Marcus said, "You showed me what it means to build something through your own effort, Mom. The pride you have in this house, the way you fought to keep it when we were trying to take it from you, that taught me something crucial. Some things are more valuable when you earn them yourself. Rebecca and I want to earn our home together. We want to look back years from now and know we did this, just the two of us." I understood completely. I was proud of him for understanding, for learning that lesson, not through my lectures, but through witnessing my actions. That's the most powerful kind of teaching, the kind that happens when you live your values rather than just talking about them. I've taken up that watercolor painting class I mentioned wanting to do years ago, the one Jennifer mocked me for considering. My paintings aren't museum quality, but they bring me joy, and I've decorated my bedroom with my favorites. Marcus bought me a professional easel for my birthday, and Rebecca gave me a set of expensive brushes. I'm learning that it's never too late to try new things, to discover new passions, to continue growing and evolving. The painting class has introduced me to a wonderful group of people, a community of mostly retired folks who gather twice a week to create and encourage each other. We have coffee after class sometimes, and I've made real friendships with several of the women. Margaret, who's 73 and just started painting last year, has become a close friend. She lost her husband 2 years ago and was looking for something to fill her time and her heart. We have lunch together occasionally, visit art galleries, and talk about life and loss and the unexpected joys of starting over. Through Margaret, I've been reminded that life doesn't stop at 60 or 70 or 80. She's planning a trip to Italy next spring to take a painting workshop in Tuscany, and she's invited me to come along. I'm seriously considering it. The old Diana, the one who existed before I stood my ground, might have said no, might have felt guilty about spending money on herself, might have worried about leaving Marcus even though he's perfectly capable and doesn't need me hovering over him. But the woman I've become through this experience understands that taking care of myself isn't selfish. It's necessary. It's healthy. It's modeling for my son what it looks like to live a full, rich life at any age. Some of my relatives still don't fully understand why I refused to sell my house to help Marcus and Jennifer. They think I was being selfish or stubborn. But Marcus defends me now, explaining to anyone who'll listen that what I did wasn't about refusing to help him. It was about refusing to be used, about maintaining boundaries, about teaching him through actions what self-respect looks like. He tells them that I gave him the greatest gift a parent can give, the gift of a strong example, even when following that example meant disappointing him in the moment. Just last month, at a family reunion, I overheard Marcus talking to his cousin Tyler, who was complaining about his own mother's stubbornness about something. Marcus put his hand on Tyler's shoulder and said something that made my heart swell. Marcus said, "Tyler, let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Sometimes what looks like stubbornness is actually strength. Sometimes what feels like your parent refusing to help you is actually them helping you in a deeper way than you can see in the moment. My mom refused to give up her house for me, and at the time, I thought she was being selfish. But she wasn't protecting her house. She was protecting both of us, her security and my character. She was teaching me that love doesn't mean sacrificing everything, that healthy relationships have boundaries, that I wasn't entitled to her life's work just because I wanted it. That lesson saved my life, man. It literally saved my life." Tyler looked confused, but several other family members who knew the full story nodded in understanding. My sister Patricia caught my eye from across the yard and raised her glass of iced tea in a silent toast. She'd stood by me through everything, never once suggesting I should compromise my boundaries, always reinforcing that I had the right to keep what was mine. Having her support had meant everything during those dark months when I'd wondered if I was being unreasonable, if I was damaging my relationship with Marcus beyond repair, if I should just give in to keep the peace. Last week, Marcus brought over a bottle of wine to celebrate some good news at work. As we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where so many hard conversations had happened, he raised his glass. Marcus said, "To my mom, Diana Marie Richardson, owner of this house and the strongest person I know. Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for showing me what it means to stand firm in your truth. And thank you for loving me enough to let me be angry with you when I needed to learn an important lesson." I clinked my glass against his and said, "To second chances and lessons learned. To boundaries and respect. To family, the real kind, built on love and honesty instead of manipulation and control." We drank to that, and as I looked around my kitchen, at the home I'd fought so hard to build and even harder to keep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't, but because I'd stood my ground when it mattered most. I'd refused to sacrifice my security for someone else's greed, and in doing so, I'd ultimately saved both myself and my son. Marcus stayed late that evening, and we moved out to the back porch as the sun set. He'd brought his guitar, the one he'd stopped playing during his marriage because Jennifer said it was too loud and she needed quiet in the evenings. He strummed a few chords, tentative at first, then with more confidence as his fingers remembered the patterns. He played an old song, one I used to sing to him when he was little, and I found myself humming along. When the song ended, Marcus set the guitar aside and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He said, "Mom, Dr. Chen asked me to do something in therapy. She asked me to write you a letter, explaining everything I felt about what happened, the whole situation with Jennifer and the house and how I treated you. I've been working on it for weeks, and I finally finished it. I'd like to read it to you, if that's okay." I nodded, my throat suddenly tight with emotion. Marcus pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket and began to read. Marcus read, "Dear Mom, I'm writing this letter as part of my healing process, but also because you deserve to hear these words. You deserve to know how I feel now, how I understand things now, and how deeply sorry I am for what I put you through. When I met Jennifer, I was so eager to prove that I was a good husband, that I was worthy of being loved, that I lost sight of who I was and where I came from. I forgot that you'd already proven I was worthy of love by loving me unconditionally my entire life. I forgot that the example of a strong, loving relationship wasn't something I needed to create from scratch. I'd witnessed it every day growing up, in the way you loved me, in the sacrifices you made, in the dignity with which you carried yourself, even when things were impossibly hard. I've taken up that watercolor painting class I mentioned wanting to do years ago, the one Jennifer mocked me for considering. My paintings aren't museum quality, but they bring me joy, and I've decorated my bedroom with my favorites. Marcus bought me a professional easel for my birthday, and Rebecca gave me a set of expensive brushes. I'm learning that it's never too late to try new things, to discover new passions, to continue growing and evolving. Some of my relatives still don't fully understand why I refused to sell my house to help Marcus and Jennifer. They think I was being selfish or stubborn, but Marcus defends me now, explaining to anyone who'll listen that what I did wasn't about refusing to help him. It was about refusing to be used, about maintaining boundaries, about teaching him through actions what self-respect looks like. He tells them that I gave him the greatest gift a parent can give, the gift of a strong example, even when following that example meant disappointing him in the moment. Last week, Marcus brought over a bottle of wine to celebrate some good news at work. As we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where so many hard conversations had happened, he raised his glass. Marcus said, "To my mom, Diana Marie Richardson, owner of this house and the strongest person I know. Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for showing me what it means to stand firm in your truth. And thank you for loving me enough to let me be angry with you when I needed to learn an important lesson." I clinked my glass against his and said, "To second chances and lessons learned. To boundaries and respect. To family the real kind, built on love and honesty instead of manipulation and control." We drank to that, and as I looked around my kitchen, at the home I'd fought so hard to build and even harder to keep, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. Not because everything was perfect, because it wasn't. But because I'd stood my ground when it mattered most, I'd refused to sacrifice my security for someone else's greed, and in doing so, I'd ultimately saved both myself and my son. The deed to this house still sits in that drawer in my living room desk. Every now and then, I take it out and look at it, remembering the 34-year-old single mother who signed those papers with shaking hands, hoping desperately that she was making the right choice. I wish I could go back and tell her that that the house she was buying would become more than just shelter. It would become a symbol of everything she was capable of, a line in the sand that would one day save her son from making the biggest mistake of his life, a testament to the power of saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. Jennifer tried to reach out to Marcus a few months ago. She sent him a long email apologizing for her behavior and asking if they could meet to talk. Marcus showed me the email, and I told him the decision was entirely his. He thought about it for a few days, then declined politely. He said he'd forgiven her for himself, for his own peace of mind, but that didn't mean he needed to invite her back into his life. Some bridges, once burned, aren't meant to be rebuilt. That's okay too. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is acknowledge that something ended for good reasons and leave it in the past where it belongs. These days, I wake up in my house, make my coffee in my kitchen, and sit on my porch watching the sunrise over the garden I planted with my own hands. I think about everything that led to this moment, all the struggles and sacrifices, all the times I wanted to give up but didn't, all the times I had to choose between being liked and being respected. I chose respect, for myself and ultimately for my son, even when that choice felt impossibly hard. The house deed bearing my name isn't just a piece of paper. It's proof that a woman alone can build something lasting. It's proof that standing firm in your boundaries, even when people call you selfish, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. It's proof that the strongest foundations aren't built on compromise when compromise means compromising yourself. And most importantly, it's proof that sometimes showing someone the deed to your house is really showing them the deed to your dignity, your self-worth, and your refusal to be diminished by anyone, even the people you love most in the world. I'm 63 years old now, and I'm still learning, still growing, still discovering new things about myself. But one thing I know with absolute certainty is that I made the right choice. When my son told me his wife had put me in my place, I showed him the deed. And in doing so, I didn't just defend my house. I defended my history, my hard work, my autonomy, and ultimately, I defended him too, even if he couldn't see it at the time. That's what mothers do. We stand firm when our children can't stand for themselves. We hold the line even when they're on the other side of it. We love them enough to disappoint them when disappointing them means saving them. This house, with its worn floors and outdated curtains and garden that needs constant tending, represents everything I've ever been and everything I hope to continue being. Strong, independent, uncompromising when it counts. And now, finally, appreciated by the son I raised to be better than the man he temporarily became. He found his way back, and I was here waiting, in the house that started it all, the house that ended it all, the house that saved us both, the house that will always be mine, deed and all.